So we are going to be doing an afterthought heel. This is kind of just like it sounds. We're basically going to be putting a little lifeline here that we're going to go back to and work our heel from at the very end of the sock. So to do this, I'm going to take my waste yarn, which is roughly the same weight as the yarn I'm using, just whatever kind of scrap you have sitting around. And I'm going to simply knit across the designated stitches, which your pattern will tell you, but it should be half the total number of stitches. So if you have a 64 stitch sock, which is pretty standard, then your afterthought heel stitches would be 32. So after I'm done knitting across with my waste yarn here, I'm going to go ahead and cut that yarn. This yarn is going to stay in place until I get to the point of working my heel, which is when the sock is done otherwise. So now I'm going to go ahead and work across these same stitches because you can see that my working yarn is still back at the beginning of the round there. And your pattern, it might have you do some kind of stitch pattern, but most likely you'll just be knitting across these stitches. So I'm going to knit across these, and then I'm going to go ahead and continue on my merry way for the rest of the sock. And then we will get back to this later. Okay, so earlier we put in our waste yarn, and then I've just kind of finished off my little mini sock here. So this is kind of roughly what your actual sock would look like, except longer. So what I'm going to do now basically is I'm going to get the stitches on either side of this waste yarn onto my needle, and then I'm going to pull the waste yarn out. So to start, I'm going to identify the stitch just above the first waste yarn stitch here. So here's what that stitch looks like, and I'm going to want to put my needle through the right leg of each stitch so that the stitches are oriented correctly on my needle when I go to work the heel. So I'm going to go ahead and take the tip of my needle and go through the right leg of each stitch along. So that's what that looks like. I've got 1/2 of the stitches on one needle, and now I'm going to turn around and do the other side. You might prefer to do this on 4 needles total, since that's how you'll eventually be working your heel, and it might be sometimes a little less awkward to use 4 too. So again, I've located the very first stitch here, and again I'm going to be going into the right leg of each stitch across. Okay, so here we are. We've got our stitches secured on either side, so now it is safe to pull out the waste yarn. So kind of separating up the needles a little bit here, I'm going to use a spare double-pointed needle, or you could use a tapestry needle or anything you want. And now I'm simply going to pick out the yarn stitch by stitch. And I like to, oops, I'm getting a little tangled there. I like to cut it periodically just so the strand is longer and it makes it easier to pull it out a little more easily. Pull out that very last little bit. And now I've got an equal number of stitches on my 2 needles here, and the next step would be to distribute evenly between 4 needles, and typically to do an afterthought heel it's worked the same way as a toe, but your pattern will tell you for sure.
Thank you so much for checking out this video. If you liked it, please give us a thumbs up and consider subscribing because we have a lot more yarn reviews, tutorials, and other fiber fun like that. Happy crafting!